And let's start with breaking news. Donald Trump has just posted on Truth Social, where he has effectively said that the U.S. will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz, so effectively blockading the Strait of Hormuz. He also went on to say any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be blown to hell. And he will also begin destroying mines that Iranians laid in the strait. Let me read the full Truth Social post that you can see on your screens there. So there you have it. The meeting went well. Most points were agreed to, but the only point that really mattered, nuclear, was not. Effective immediately, the United States Navy, the finest in the world, will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. At some point, we will reach an all being allowed to go in, all being allowed to go out basis. But Iran has not allowed that to happen by merely saying there may be a mine out there somewhere that nobody knows about but them. This is world extortion, and leaders of countries, especially the United States of America, will never be extorted. I've also instructed our Navy to seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. No one who pays an illegal toll will have safe passage on high seas. We will also begin destroying the mines that Iranians laid in the straits. Any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be blown to hell. Iran knows better than anyone how to end this situation, which has already devastated their country. Their navy is gone, their air force is gone, their anti-aircraft and radar are useless. Khomeini and most of their leaders are dead, all because of their nuclear ambition. The blockade will begin shortly. Other countries will be involved in this blockade. Iran will not be allowed to profit off this illegal act.
Let me tell you something right now. And if you've been paying attention over the last few days, then none of this should surprise you. Because what we're watching unfold with Iran is exactly um, what I knew was going to happen step by step, piece by piece. And now the people who were panicking, the black pill crowd, the doomers, the anti-American commentators, are about to look really, really stupid when this all plays out because President Trump is doing the only logical, I should say, logical thing any strong leader would do in this situation, and that is taking control of the Strait of Hormuz, which again, I told you, I knew or had some type of familiarity of what he was doing because we got the news that Iran couldn't even remove their own mines from the water. So if you think about how ridiculous that is for a second, you're claiming control over one of the most important strategic waterways in the world, and you can't even clear it yourself. So that right there completely told me and also shattered the illusion of power that Iran was trying to project. Because once it became clear that international forces would have to step in just to reopen the strait, that entire game changed. Because if you can't open it, you don't control it. It's that simple. And what we're seeing now is Iran being exposed for what it really is, a paper tiger that talks big and ultimately depends on the rest of the world to clean up the mess that it creates. And here's the part that nobody on the left wants to talk about. This is an international waterway. This is not Iran's private property. They do not get to sit there and charge tolls like some kind of pirate regime controlling global trade routes. That is not how international law works. And it's funny, isn't it? Because the same Democrats, the same leftists, the same people who are constantly screaming about international law anytime Trump breathes the wrong way, suddenly have nothing to say when Iran is clearly violating it. Not a word, complete silence. And that tells you everything you need to know about where their priorities actually are. Because it's never really about law or principles. It's about opposing America and opposing American strength. And that's why every time the United States asserts itself on a global stage, these people panic, they complain, they root against their own country. And in doing so, they end up looking foolish when reality hits them. Because whether they like it or not, American leadership, especially under Trump, understands leverage, understands power, and understands how to apply pressure in a way that forces outcomes. And that's exactly what's happening here. This is not some reckless move. This is a calculated, logical escalation, specifically in an economic escalation, because what Trump has effectively announced is a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And let's be clear about what that actually means, because you're going to hear the media try to spin it. You're going to hear them use scary language. But at the end of the day, a blockade in this context means we are taking control of the situation. We are ensuring that global commerce can continue without interference from a hostile regime. And at the same time, we are flipping the leverage that Iran thought it had over the world and turning it right back on them. And more importantly, on China, because this is the part that a lot of people are missing. This is not just about Iran. Iran is a piece on the board. The real negotiation, the real pressure campaign is aimed at China, because China relies heavily on energy flowing through that regime, or I mean, through that region, not regime, through that region. And by controlling the strait, by dictating the terms of access, the United States is now in power, or in a position to influence, I should say, in a position to influence not just Iran's behavior, but China's as well, which is exactly what I've been saying in previous coverage of a video that you guys may have came across. Go check it out. And this is a broader strategy. And if you are only looking at Iran, you're not seeing the full picture. And even now, as all of this is happening, the negotiations are still ongoing, which again proves the point that this is controlled escalation, not chaos, because you had JD Vance come out and say very clearly, this is our final and best offer. In my last video, go check it out. I'll actually put it at the end of this video so you guys can go see what JD Vance had to say in my input about it, but in breakdown. But at the same time, he also made it a point to say that he doesn't want to negotiate in public, which is exactly what you would expect if serious discussions are still happening behind closed doors. So yes, they are still negotiating, but they are negotiating from a position of strength. And that's the key difference here, because while those talks continue, the United States is actively stripping Iran of any leverage it thought it had, tightening the economic pressure and setting the terms of engagement. And that is how you win these kinds of conflicts, without firing a shot, by making it clear that the other side has no good options left. And that's exactly where Iran is being pushed right now. And then a lot of people are about to learn that everything they were told about this situation, especially by the media and the so-called experts, was completely wrong. It also makes me wonder, when we have a president or public officials, when it comes to governors, mayors, should it be a requirement to have them operate like a business, right? I believe that a country, in my perspective, should be operated like a business. So what I'm saying is, do you guys think, and I want to know you guys' thoughts down below in the comments, should it be a requirement that a public official understands how business works, also have experience in the private sector, or being some type of businessman or businesswoman? Because if you understand how business works, you also understand how economics work. And then also you understand how capitalism is what makes things thrive, let alone helps with negotiating, just like Trump when it comes to the art of the deal. So let me know what you guys think about that. But hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I want you guys to check this out.
On behalf of Pakistan, I would like to express gratitude to the two sides for appreciating Pakistan's efforts to help achieve the ceasefire and its mediatory role. We hope that the two sides continue with the positive spirit to achieve durable peace and prosperity for the entire region and beyond. It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire. Pakistan has been and will continue to play its role to facilitate engagement and dialogue between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America in the days to come. I thank you all.
Well, we're going to be blockading. It'll take a little while, but it'll be effective pretty soon. And we had meetings yesterday. They, as you said, lasted 21 hours. That was a long meeting. We had some very, very good representatives, as you know, JD and Steve and Jared. So we were well represented, but we didn't get there on the important issue. They want to have nuclear weapons. They're not going to have nuclear weapons. I've been saying that for 30 years. I would never allow that to happen before I was in politics. And that country will not have nuclear weapons. Most countries shouldn't be allowed to have, but that country will not have nuclear weapons. Doing well at all. They're getting killed. I could take out Iran in one day. I could take down in 1 hour. I could have their entire energy, everything, every one of their plants, their electric generating plants, which is a big deal. And I hate to do it because if I do it, it takes you 10 years to rebuild. They'll never be able to rebuild it. And the other thing you take out are the bridges. I took out one just to show them because they went public with a statement that wasn't true. They admitted it. I say, I'm going to take out a bridge. And I took out a bridge. And that was the end of that. Now they've been really behaving quite well. But in one half of a day, they wouldn't have one bridge standing. They wouldn't have one electric generating plant standing. And they're back in the Stone Ages. I'd rather not do that. But I do believe they're going to come to the table on this, because nobody can be so stupid as to say that we want to have nuclear weapons and they have no cards. They have no cards whatsoever.
So
yeah, you saw that. You heard it. If you're actually paying attention to what's going on here, then you understand that this is not random. This is not chaotic. This is a very deliberate two-track strategy that the United States is running right now. Because on one hand, you got the diplomatic side. On the other hand, you got the economic and strategic pressure being applied in real time. And from the diplomatic standpoint, what we are hearing is that the United States sat down and negotiated with Iran for roughly 21 hours, laying everything out on the table, making it crystal clear where the red lines are, what we are willing to accept, and more importantly, what we are absolutely not going to tolerate. And according to what's being reported, Iran was actually willing to go along with a lot of the framework, except for one major issue, and you already know what that is. They want to keep their enriched uranium. They want to maintain the capability to develop nuclear weapons. And at the same time, they're trying to play this game where they say, oh, we don't actually want nukes, while refusing the one condition that were proved they don't want nukes, which is giving up the enriched uranium. And that right there tells you everything you need to know about their intentions, because if you truly didn't want nuclear weapons, then that wouldn't be a sticking point. But it is. And that's why those negotiations, at least for now, are at a standstill. But here's the key thing that a lot of people are missing. It actually doesn't matter in the short term when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, because Iran has already effectively lost control of that situation. That part of the conflict is over, is done, because the United States and its allies are going to secure that waterway, regardless of what Iran says or does. And that's what I've been trying to explain to you guys. This is step one in a broader escalation strategy, specifically economic escalation, where we take the one piece of leverage over Iran thought it had over the global economy, when we flip it back on them, not just on them, but on China. Because again, you have to understand that China is heavily dependent on energy ships that pass through that region. So when we take control of the Strait of Hormuz, we are not just dealing with Iran, we are sending a message to Beijing as well. And you can see this coming from a mile away if you were paying attention, because even during the negotiations, while all of this diplomatic talk was happening, we had U.S. naval ships moving through the strait, asserting freedom of navigation, making it very clear that this was never actually on the table as a concession. We were never going to allow Iran to sit there and start charging tolls or restricting access like they own the place. That was never going to happen under any circumstances. And the people who were out here claiming that the United States was going to back down, that we were going to allow Iran to dictate terms, those people just don't understand how power works on a global stage. They don't understand how strategic choke points like this are handled. And frankly, they shouldn't be taken seriously, because they've been wrong every step of the way. And now we're seeing this play out in real time, because the president is now announcing a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And again, don't let the language confuse you. What that really means is that we are taking back control of that waterway and ensure that it remains open under terms that benefit global stability, not the ambitions of a hostile regime. And from here, things start to get even more interesting, because once that control is established, the leverage completely shifts, and that sets up the next phase of this strategy, which is exactly what I've been looking toward, right? And actually anticipating. So with that being said, let's actually break down what this move mean, and where this is likely headed next. So I want you guys to check this out.
We've got Trey Yinks with us now from Tel Aviv. So Trey, what can you tell us about this Truth Social post that Trump just posted?
Look, this is a significant announcement by President Trump, and once again, an indication that the United States holds the cards here. The president is the decision maker, even as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz. And we heard just yesterday, as these two Navy destroyers passed through the strait, threats from the Iranians claiming that they would fire on these vessels. And the president is very clear here in his post on Truth Social. This will not be tolerated. Threats or strikes against U.S. forces or vessels in the region will have consequences. And so once again, the president is showing who is in charge, not just at the negotiating table, but on the battlefield. And we talk about the Iranian Navy and what is left of it. There was a systematic campaign by the United States and Israel over the past 40 days when Operation Epic Fury was ongoing that showed the Iranian Navy had no way to defend its own vessels, whether it was the mine-laying vessels or even these larger ships. Most of them are at the bottom of the sea at this point, and that is a result of the heavy U.S. strikes that were ordered by President Trump and executed by U.S. Central Command. And so with this decision to order a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the president is once again showing the Iranians if they are unwilling to make concessions at the negotiating table, the president will force them into those concessions on the battlefield.
And, of course, take away all the money that they're making by letting those ships, the ships that they're letting that have paid the toll pass through. In his Truth Social, he writes that I have also instructed our Navy to seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. No one who pays an illegal toll will have safe passage on the high seas. So that's going to be controversial with a Chinese or Pakistani flagged ship that Iran has allowed through. What's the reaction in the international community going to be to that?
Look, there may be some people who are critical of President Trump, but the president rightly pointed out that these countries did not participate in helping to open the Strait of Hormuz during Operation Epic Fury. Sure. We've heard a lot of comments from European officials who say that the president should make different decisions or that they're trying to put pressure on the operation. The reality is you have countries like France, for example, who have come out in opposition of what the president is saying, but they're not helping to open the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, so now that you actually seen what President Trump said directly, now you understand what I've been trying to explain this whole time, as you guys can see on the screen from President Donald J. Trump social posts. Because this isn't speculation anymore. This is the strategy being laid out in plain English, and it confirms everything we've been talking about the United States. The United States is moving to blockade any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz until we can get to a point where it's open for everybody equally. And the reason we are in this situation in the first place is because Iran tried to play games. They tried to create uncertainty by saying, well, there might be mines out there somewhere, as if that somehow gives them control, when in reality it just exposes the fact that they don't even know what's going on in their own backyard. And again, this goes back to the fundamental point. If you cannot open the strait, you do not control the strait. And Iran has now proven beyond any doubt that they cannot open it, which means all of this talk about them controlling one of the most important waterways in the world was always a bluff. It was always smoke and mirrors designed to scare the global market and give them leverage that they didn't actually have. And what they were really trying to do was force ships into routes that benefited them so they could essentially tax global trade without actually having full control. And now that bluff has been called and it's collapsing in real time, which is why everything that's happening right now is actually very predictable if you're looking at it logically, because once it became clear that Iran couldn't clear their own mines, there was only one outcome. The United States and its allies were going to have to go in, secure the strait, and reopen it ourselves. And if we are the ones doing that, then of course we're going to take control of it. That's just common sense. And that's exactly what President Trump is doing. He's following the process. This is not random. This is step by step. First, you secure it militarily, which is what the blockade is about. And then you apply economic pressure. And this is where things get really interesting, because what the blockade actually does is it flips the entire economic dynamic on its head. Iran thought they had leverage because they could close the strait and drive up oil prices and pressure the global economy. But now we're saying, no, you don't get to play that game, because we're going to control the flow entirely. And if we control the flow, then we can cut off your ability to sell oil. And that is devastating for their economy, because their entire system is heavily dependent on oil revenue. But more importantly, it's not just about Iran. You've seen in that clip where they said France opposed what President Trump said, and they opposed the simple fact that the operation that our President Donald J. Trump is doing in regards to making sure that the strait is equally and openly flowing, and its stability within the strait. So when tensions rise because Iran want to have a tantrum. They can't just open and close when they want to, because then global trade will be affected, let alone oil being transported, which then in turn creates limited amount of oil, which then makes gas prices go high, as we see here in America, because we go based on the global market when we price our oil, not on the local market. Even though we don't really take from the Strait, we have oil here at home, but we charge that global price, because if we charge cheap just because we have it in America, then obviously individuals who depend on Iran and the infrastructure of them having so much oil in the Strait, they would just come here and buy our oil cheap if we lower our price and flip it for more profit, and we'll be losing money. But if we could charge that global market price just like they do with oil across the world and like Iran, then we can actually increase and actually strengthen our infrastructure and not lose out on money, which then goes into the American economy, strengthening the American dollar. So I'll say all that to say that with this instability happening, we already winning anyway, because those allies are already looking for supply chain alternatives to keep their oil sustainable, because they already see that Iran has its tantrum. So what they're going to do, they're going to come here to America, like Texas, and they're going to buy oil from us, and we're going to generate. So I'm saying all that to say that we are controlling the Strait now. And when you look at that, the entire system, when it comes to Iran, is heavily dependent on oil revenue. But more importantly, it's not just about Iran, it's about China. And they'll have to do business with us. And also, if they want that dependent oil, they will also come to look at us for supply chain ability. So we controlling the flow. And if you look at it, this is the part that people keep overlooking, because China is the X factor in all of this. China relies heavily on oil coming through that region. And up until now, Iran was selectively allowing certain countries. But like I was saying in the clip, France was opposing this whole operation when all President Donald J. Trump would do was trying to make sure that the Strait was flowing and won't be basically determined by Iran having its tantrums and playing these open and close games, affecting everybody globally, and let alone trade and oil for countries that rely on that region heavily. So France want to oppose Trump, but when the Strait is open, they benefit from the Strait of Hormuz. But you opposing what Trump is doing when he's actually trying to help everybody, when we don't even get oil from this Strait. So you have to trust us militarily to secure your own country, France. So how can you oppose something that's against you? That was at the end of the clip. That's what he was saying, that France wants to oppose Trump, but when the Strait is open, they benefit from it. So Iran was selectively allowing certain countries, including China, to continue to receive shipments while restricting others. So China wasn't really feeling the full pressure of the situation. But once the United States steps in and says nobody is moving through the Strait unless it's under our terms, because we secure in the flow anyway, to make sure things go well, now suddenly China has a problem. Now suddenly this becomes a direct economic threat to Beijing. And that's the whole point, because what we're really doing here is negotiating with China through Iran. Iran is essentially the middleman in this situation. They depend on China. China depends on them. By squeezing Iran, we are indirectly squeezing China, forcing them to make a decision. Either they escalate, which comes with massive risk, or they pressure Iran to accept the deal, just like they already pressured China to negotiate with us and get down, come to the table, right? But that's what's happening now, right? They pressuring Iran to accept the deal that's already on the table. And that's a strategy. That's the strategy in a nutshell, because China was already pressuring Iran to just hurry up and negotiate with us, even though the negotiation is still in works. But China the one told Iran, get your act together and go talk to them people. And we already did the diplomatic part, America. We already laid out the offer. Now we're doing the economic squeeze to force compliance. And if this works the way it's intended to, not only does Iran get pushed into accepting terms, but we also establish long-term leverage over them. Because if we maintain control of the Strait moving forward, then any future deal becomes enforceable in a way that it never was before. Because the moment Iran steps out of line, we can just do this again. We can shut down their oil revenue. We can pressure their economy, and we can even hit China indirectly. And that is a level of leverage that completely changes the game. It all stems from the fact that Iran overplayed their hand, because, as I've been saying, their greatest strength in this situation was their ability to threaten the Strait. Turned out to be the greatest weakness. because once it was exposed that they couldn't actually control it, everything fell apart for them. And now you got President Trump making it very clear that if Iran tries to respond militarily, if they fire on U.S. forces or even civilian vessels, the response is going to be overwhelming. And that's not a bluff. That's a warning, because at that point, the options on the table expand dramatically. And we start talking about things like direct military escalation, targeting key assets, even potentially going in and physically securing their nuclear materials if it comes to that. And none of those scenarios end well for Iran, which is why, when you really look at the board right now, they are in a losing position no matter what they do. Because if they don't respond, then we take control of the Strait, and if they lose leverage and their economy gets squeezed to the point where the regime itself could start to collapse under the pressure. And if they do respond, then they trigger a level of escalation that they are not equipped to handle. So either way, they're boxed in, and that's why this move is so significant, because it's not just about reopening a waterway, it's about shifting the balance of power in a way that gives the United States and its allies the upper hand, not just now, but moving forward. And that's why I've been saying from the beginning, once we get to this point where Iran couldn't even manage the Strait they claimed to control, this outcome was inevitable. They forced the situation on themselves, and then are going to have to deal with the consequences of that miscalculation. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture here, it becomes very clear this was already heading in this direction, because there was never a realistic scenario where the United States was going to allow a hostile regime like Iran to permanently control a critical global choke point and use it to economically blackmail the rest of the world. That was never going to happen. It was never sustainable, and it was never logical. And now we're watching a reality set in, because what President Trump is doing here is not reckless. It's strategic, calculated chess move designed to put both Iran and China in check at the same time. And the brilliance of it is that it creates a situation where no matter how Iran responds, they lose. Because if they choose not to escalate militarily, then the United States secures the Strait, reopens it on our terms, gains long-term economic leverage over them, I should say, gains economic leverage over them, which means their ability to fund their regime through oil revenue is now at risk. And over time, that kind of pressure can destabilize the regime from within. And you're talking about a scenario where you don't even need a formal deal, because the economic reality forces change anyway. And on the other hand, if Iran decides to escalate, if they decide to attack U.S. forces or interfere with operations, then they are inviting a level of military response that they simply cannot withstand. Because let's be honest about the reality here. They do not have the naval power. They do not have the air power, and they do not have the infrastructure to go toe-to-toe with the United States and its allies. So either path leads to a loss for them. Sorry. And that's why this is such a strong position for the United States to be in, especially when you factor in China. Because again, China now has a direct stake in how this plays out. Their access to energy is on the line, and that means they have an incentive to step in and push Iran toward a resolution, which is exactly what you would want if you're trying to avoid a larger conflict while still achieving your strategic objectives. And this is why I've been saying that this situation is about more than just Iran. It's about the broader global power structure. It's about who controls critical resources, who sets the rules, and who has the leverage when it matters most. And right now, with this move, the United States is putting itself back into the driver's seat. And that has long-term implications, not just for the Middle East, but for global trade, energy markets, and international politics as a whole. And again, this all goes back to the original point. Iran overplayed its hand. They tried to use the Strait as a weapon because they couldn't win in a conventional sense. And in doing so, they triggered the exact outcome they were trying to avoid. They forced the United States to step in, take control, and flip that leverage back on them. And now they're stuck dealing with the consequences of that decision. And we're going to see how it plays out from here, especially in terms of how China responds, because that's going to be a major factor in what happens next. But as it stands right now, the United States is in a dominant position. That's not something you're going to hear from the mainstream media, because they rather focus on fear and chaos than actually explain the strategy behind these moves. But when you break it down logically, when you look at the incentives, the capabilities, and the outcomes, it becomes very clear that this is a calculated effort to reassert control and force a resolution on terms that benefit the United States and its allies. So at this point, it's just a matter of watching how the other players respond, because the board has been set, the move has been made, and now the pressure is on them, not us. So let me know what you guys think about this whole situation, where you think it's headed, about whether or not you think Iran or China is going to blink first. Make sure you like the video, comment down below, share this with people who need to see it. Subscribe to the channel, turn on your post notifications so you don't miss the next update. On that note, family, peace.